This is the Green Corn Rebellion Show. I'm Gregory Harden II, and today I'm here with Matt Salcido, who is running for City Council in Ward 2 in Norman, Oklahoma. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. We had a busy day today, but that's most days. We're only 3 weeks out, so pretty action-packed.
All right. So, first question is, where are you from and where did you grow up at?
Yeah, I'm was born in Oklahoma. Actually, I was born in Edmond. Um, I lived a lot of time in Edmond growing up, and then I moved to Bakersfield with my mom for quite some time. So I spent a couple years in Bakersfield. Then about 13, 14, I moved back to Oklahoma to live out the rest of my high school years with my dad. So I've I went to Oklahoma City Public Schools my sophomore year, my freshman year. Then I went to Deer Creek my sophomore year, and I ended up at Edmond North, which is where I graduated from. But I spent the rest of my growing up years on a couple acres in rural Guthrie. So I got really the gambit of experiences in terms of Oklahoma living. And I've been living in Norman just about since I moved out. I love it here. I definitely think it's the best city I've ever lived in.
All right, that's cool. What made you become active in politics?
So I think that the answer is probably the same for most young people. At 19, this is definitely not how I imagined I would be spending my junior year of college, but kind of politics is something I felt like I had to get into. I'm an environmentalist. I've been a community organizer for as far back as I really can remember. I started with March for Our Lives. Sorry, my dog is really excited to see me. I started with March for Our Lives when I was about 15 years old. And if you can remember, that was like a 6,000 person endeavor in OKC. I organized my walkout at my school. It just kind of made me realize that I was really passionate about getting people together under common ideas to search for solutions to our problems. Then I became aware of climate change, unfortunately, like most folks my age, and kind of just realized that the folks who are in the rooms making the decisions about my future are not considering what the livability of my future even will be. So I really am getting into politics because I truly believe that without a young person's voice at the table, there will be no future for our youth. And so this is really a movement made out of necessity, really to represent us in the face of, catastrophic injustice.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, what made you want to run for City Council in Norman?
What made me want to run for city council? I usually ride my bicycle or skateboard to work every day. I just am somebody who thinks that if I can kind of curtail my individual missions, I should if I have the resources. So one morning I was skateboarding to work, and there was a older gentleman in a wheelchair who actually drove his wheelchair down somebody's driveway and rode in the street because the sidewalks were so crumpled around where I stomp around that they were truly unnavigable for him. Where I could just, pick up my skateboard and walk, he was immobilized by our city's crumbling infrastructure. And it just kind of made me realize how we're not even meeting the basic needs of our traditionally marginalized community, like our differently able folks, our low and middle income working families who rely on public transportation to get around, our unhoused folks. We've been scaling back our funding to Norman Food and Shelter. So really, I decided to run because as a 19-year-old transgender democratic socialist living in Oklahoma, I understand what it means to live on the fringes. I've experienced, workplace insecurity. I've lost jobs over my identity. And so I figured there's nobody living on the front lines fighting for frontline issues, and I want to do that. So he really is my inspiration for deciding that someone's got to shake things up, and if nobody's willing to do it, then I'm ready to step up and take that on.
All right. Um, So on your website, it says you'd like to do things in order to make Norman more green or environmentally friendly. What are some of those things that you'd like to do?
So Norman has an RF 100, which is a non-binding resolution to bring our carbon emissions down to completely neutral. So we're pretty one of like 3 cities in Oklahoma that have that because Norman is an awesome progressive champion. But unfortunately, as is often the case with resolution, there's not any binding mechanisms or really any manners of enforcement to ensure that we really do reduce our emissions to a zero. So I want to present the policies that will really make that possible. And what I think is the best strategy to reduce our emissions as a city is to get as many cars off the road as possible. When you think about cars off the road, you have to think about building the infrastructure that allows people, still affords people mobility without needing to have a single transport vehicle. So we're really focused on interconnectivity through rapid, reliable transit. Just recently, the city of Norman took over public busing. It used to be subsidized and handled completely by the university. The university told the city that they had very little time to come up with a plan to implement their own busing. So the city really was put in a really difficult situation, formed a contract with Embark, and of course, under such time constraints, they weren't able to kind of create the system that they want. Just a couple of months ago, we had a vote about a public vote about investing more money into our public infrastructure and expanding it. The people of Norman overwhelmingly voted yes, which showed me that there is public passion for public transit. So I want to introduce a Monday through Sunday service, eliminate our contract with Embark so that we can make more local union jobs here in Norman by allowing Normanites to drive the buses. I want to build a centralized bus depot near City Hall and closer to our homeless shelter. Right now, our bus depot is on Jenkins and Brooks, which is university property. So folks are driving to the university to be able to use the bus to get around. The university tickets and fines if you park in that parking lot without a commuter parking pass for the school. So it really discourages folks to take the bus because if you want to take the bus, say to your 9 to 5 job in the city, there's no place to leave your car. So getting cars off the road is our number one priority. Then we want to reinvest in public sidewalks. Those are another method of connectivity that encourages people to keep their cars off the road. But we're also worried about things like installing a solar panel farm at Lake Thunderbird that would not only offer renewable energy for Norman, but would give us a revenue stream as we could sell extra energy to local cities or local folks interested in using solar power as well. So really focused on those kind of initiatives to best achieve large scale goals, but we also have much smaller plans like implementing a community gardening initiative, which will get folks out of their home interested in digging in the dirt, eating healthier foods. That encouraging people to eat less meat goes a long way in controlling individual carbon emissions. So we really have a variety of policies from big, like Monday through Sunday service, to small, like community gardening initiatives to equip our city to meet our RF 100 goals.
All right. Um, I like a lot of that. So, also on your website, you say you'd like to make internet a publicly guaranteed utility. What are some of your reasons for wanting to do that?
So the United Nations says that internet is a human right. Most of the times, whenever you're looking for places to eat, places to shop, if you're talking about doing homework for school, applying for jobs, the internet is the place to do that. When I think about internet as a public utility, I think about the fact that Norman already has broadband cables already laid throughout the city, and it would just be a matter of converting that to a socialized utility rather than a private one. I not only think that would be easy for the city just because of the foundation already laid, but it would provide a true cornucopia of benefits to the citizens of Norman because we can streamline the cost. As you know, internet companies charge out the wazoo for internet speeds that are often slow, sometimes throttled. We could guarantee internet for everybody at very little cost to Norman, offer ourselves an opportunity to make an additional revenue stream for the city and offer then subsidized programs to ensure that lower income Normanites can access internet for free. I really think it is one of the most things I'm most passionate about because I truly think that internet is really a necessity of the modern age, and being unable to access it is really prevents people from finding opportunities and finding out about things and accessing necessary information. There really is no true democracy or just society if we can't all have access to the same resources. I believe internet should be on the top of that list.
All right. A good way to fight back against net neutrality as well.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we're thinking about too, because then there would be constituents that would hold the city accountable, right? Their votes would be an accountability mechanism. Right now, there's no way for me to hold somebody like Cox or AT&T accountable for the websites that are coming up at the top of my list and what small medias they're pushing to the very bottom because they don't want me to see. So I also think it would be really great for democracy. And since Norman is just such a uniquely political, like hotbed of activity, I think this is definitely one of the places where we should be fighting for equal access to information for all.
All right. Let's see. So, I think you've touched on this a little bit, but another part of your platform involves revitalizing Norman's public transit. What all is something that you'd like to do in order to do that?
Yeah. So I'll keep it really brief so that I don't touch on anything I've already touched on, but I want to terminate our contract with Embark. We actually are endorsed by the Norman City Employees Union, and the reason we got that endorsement is because I'm big on two things: working people's rights and unions. Unions are truly the backbone of collective bargaining power, and I want to increase the amount of union jobs because the more union jobs there are, the more accountable we can hold businesses and employers to provide good wages, to provide reasonable working conditions. And so that is my first priority: bringing that in house, offering those jobs to Normanites, and making sure that we're paying not only livable wages, but wages that encourage people to build lives here in Norman, because that's not the current case right now. Kids graduate from OU and they leave. We have a large elderly population and then a large public school education and not very much going on in the middle. We're suffering from brain drain. And so we have to think about unique ways to attract new talent and attract laborers to our city and retain them. And I think building a more diverse set of union jobs that are going to have good wages and reasonable work conditions is the best strategy for that. So that would be our first step. We would then fight to build a centralized bus depot so that commuters can take the bus when they want to travel long distances without being penalized by the university. But most importantly, I want to put electric wheelchair lifts on our buses. There is something to me that is disconcerting about a bus driver getting off of a bus, most of which have 2 million miles, the buses in which we've purchased during our contract handover, old buses that don't have electric wheelchair lifts, and bus drivers have to get off the bus to lay down the ramp so that differently abled folks can even get on the bus to begin with, when there should be that independence, that knowledge that you can board the bus, that the bus has the tools and the resources to make sure that you can board safely, that they're thinking of you, being intentional about ensuring that everyone has access equally to this mode of transportation. So those are all extremely important to me. Right now, we don't have weekend services, but for working class folks, the grind does not stop on Saturday and Sunday. I don't get to work on Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So the buses shouldn't work on Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. They should be for all of us to use, and with a schedule comprehensive enough that our city can rely on them to get around. So those are our big passions and drives for public transportation, and I think that bold policy on those points specifically could really change the face of public transportation in Norman.
All right. So you support decriminalizing marijuana, correct?
Yes.
All right. Could you tell me a little why you support doing that?
Yes. There's a couple of reasons. I mean, that's such a nuanced subject, but such the obvious one is that when you think about alcohol sales versus marijuana sales, the marijuana sales has generated so much more revenue for Oklahoma than marijuana has. Norman is in a terrible budget crisis. We're $4 million short for public transportation. We're in a debacle with developers, over $17 million. We don't have a pot of money sitting at the end of the rainbow, but we still have a lot of essential goods and services we need to find the cash to provide. And I think decriminalizing marijuana at the city level so that the city can utilize those funds to pay for things like higher wages for bus drivers and garbage truck workers would be excellent. To me, there really is no difference between a medical and recreational. We all know how easy it is to get a medical card if you want one. I think I might have read a statistic that said something like 1 in 10 Oklahomans have one. So I truly just think it's the next logical step. I'm in favor of decriminalization of all drugs. I don't think that drug use makes somebody less of a person or less valuable, less owed basic human rights and respect. And so I think that when we criminalize drugs, we cloud the conversation with shame instead of opening conversations for healing and progress. And I also just understand that often weed functions as a drug that helps people transition away from harder drugs and is a gateway in the opposite direction, a gateway for sobriety for a lot of folks. So I think marijuana has a plethora of benefits when it comes to anxiety, medicine. When you think about medical marijuana cards and the amount they cost, how classist they are, saying, it doesn't matter if you're disabled, you have to have this much money to get the treatment that you need. That should be unacceptable. That should be abhorrent to us, especially in the face of how much money we could turn for the city that we desperately need. So.
All right. And your platform also says you want to promote harm reduction and needle exchange rehabilitation. This is something I don't really hear a lot of candidates talk about, so I'm really excited that you're talking about it. Could you talk a little bit about this?
Yes. So we have a beautiful little park here in Norman called Sutton Wilderness, which is just our little slice of magic outdoorsiness in my neck of the woods. And there is often tent encampments in Sutton Wilderness because we are struggling to keep up with a growing homeless population here in Norman. And when I was at the city employee meeting, when we were discussing, what is the city seeing? There's nobody who better understands the plight of the city than city workers. They exist on the front lines or are waging the direct battles to keep our city running smoothly. And one of the things they talked a lot about is that when they meet homeless people, when they meet unhoused folks in Sutton Wilderness, there's lots of needles, there's lots of drug paraphernalia, and we really had to grapple as a community in that conversation with not only how we could treat these folks with the utmost dignity and respect that they deserve, but how we could then offer opportunities for rehabilitation to keep them safe. If we can't house them, which I believe we can house them, and I'm worried about public housing for all, but in the meantime, we should at least be offering opportunities for folks to have access to things like clean needles. It only benefits the community to prevent the spread of things like HEP, of things like HIV. Minimizing those and mitigating those damages is really important, but it also keeps dirty needles off the street. They're really worried about the presence of dirty needles by the tent encampments in Sutton Wilderness, and we could drastically reduce that if folks knew they could go turn in their dirty needle for a clean needle. I also think that once again that any kind of stigmatization around drug use really only goes to harm folks that have different needs than us. And so I want to work against that as much as possible. And I think there's no better way to open a conversation about treating drug users with the respect and dignity that they deserve than ensuring that when they do use the drugs, that they can use them safely. and that there could be medical professionals ready to respond to things like overdoses or, miscalculations.
All right. Um, let's see here. So on your platform, you also say you want to fight anti-homelessness ordinances. What else are some things you'd like to do to deal with the homelessness problem in Norman?
Okay, yes. So recently we have scaled back our funding for food and shelter, which is actually not a city run homeless shelter. It's kind of more private, and the city provides funding for food
Hmm.
and shelter to be able to operate in that capacity. But we're scaling back our funding, which doesn't really make sense. And we seem to be struggling with almost an increase in these issues, and city employees are talking about how often they're having to go to places like Sutton Wilderness to pick up homeless folks and bring them to resources. But what we're really thinking about is whenever a tent encampment is found right now, we stick a sign in the ground that gives them a warning, essentially, that tells them they have to leave. And when I see that, that resonates with me in a way that I find really uncomfortable. Where are they supposed to go? Why
Yeah.
are we sticking signs in the ground that tell them they have to leave? They're living in tents. Nobody wants to live that way. And the fact that there's a person who may lay their head outside on the ground tonight is shameful to me. Makes me feel ashamed. Makes me wonder what more labor we need to be putting in. So recently, our city opened up a warming shelter, which is just a temporary solution to a long term problem. So I want to go ahead and use some of those alternative funding mechanisms that we talked about to bring in additional revenue into Norman to go ahead and fund that warming shelter year round. Right now, they have the warming shelter set up inside of a public library, which is closed, meaning that it's our building that the city owns. It's up to us what to do with it. Opening a warming shelter was a good first step, and I think we should finish the deal by opening up a homeless shelter inside until we're ready to build a larger homeless shelter that comes equipped with necessary mental and drug rehabilitation resources inside. But I definitely think that a transition from a temporary warming shelter to a long-term warming shelter and bringing on potentially 7 to 8 staff members is incredibly feasible, especially if we can bring in any of that additional income that we're talking about. And I think would be a great first step to getting people off the streets while we have longer conversations about what we're going to do to make sure that there is public housing available for everyone.
All right. Okay. So last question is, who are your favorite music artists?
My favorite music artist. Okay, and I can't answer wrong. Definitely, one of my favorite music artists is going to be right now. I really like Harry Styles, but I know that's probably the wrong answer. But definitely, my most favorite of all time is Hosier. I
Okay.
like what Hosier does. I like his vibe. I saw he was the first person I ever saw in concert. Actually, I saw Hosier at the Zoo Amphitheater, and I think that your first concert that you ever see in your whole life is one that sticks with you, and you cannot
Hmm.
help but love them forever. Us seeing live music is just totally different than hearing music or listening to a vinyl, and so he really introduced me to live music, and he is such a beautiful live singer, almost better than on the tapes too. So he really is the best person I could have heard as my first concert. So probably Hosier is my favorite artist.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you for coming on. I wish you luck in your race. When's the election again?
February 11th is our
Okay.
election, but there's three of us. So if there's no 51%, we'll be running
The
again.
Yeah. Okay. Could you tell me where we can find you on social media and what your campaign website is?
Yes, our campaign website is mattforward2.com. Sorry, I was getting up to get a walk card so I could make sure I get the Facebook and stuff right. Our website's mattforward2.com, and our Twitter is at Matt4Ward2, and our Facebook is Matthew for Ward 2. We post every day, and every day we're out there knocking on the doors. We've knocked thousands of doors, actually. So if you live in Norman Ward 2 and haven't seen us yet, you definitely will. For February 11th.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.